Welcome to my podcast. My name is Aldo Matza, percussionist and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to join us in conversations with friends, music specialists, great artists, and generally music people and specialists in our community. Today I have Bill Bruford joining us from England, and the name of this podcast is Shaping Your Journey. Now, all of us, of course, have our stories, and what goes on behind the thinking behind shaping our journey. We all know what some people have done in the music world, the recordings and film or whatever. But it's really interesting to have the conversations about what we were thinking. Who were the people who opened the doors for us, or what made us turn left as opposed to turning right? So, Bill, before we go into that, if you wouldn't mind just putting us up to speed as far as a little bit of your history from the beginning, and then we can talk about the other stuff.
Hello, everybody. How long have you got, Aldo? I mean,
we've got forever.
Starting from the beginning, I started when I picked up drums when I was about 13, I guess, so 12 perhaps, and got into rock and roll. And the big Beatles came along and kind of like that, and then got into jazz in a big way. And then I fell into some of what became progressive rock groups of the day, like Yes and King Crimson and Genesis in UK. I did all of them. But really, I think my heart was in jazz. And after about 10 or 15 years in the rock world, I kind of moved sideways to jazz, where I've played the last 20 or 25 years of my career. I retired from public performance in 2009. I went back to school, or what we call in the UK Surrey University, and got a doctorate in musicology, just to try to, we'll get on to a bit of that, I guess, later on. And then in quick order, released 3 box sets of music, because there was quite a lot of work generated in the time that I was around, in the 40 or 50 years I was around. And wrote a couple of books, and now I'm speaking to Aldo. So it's all been a breeze, nothing to it, said he, lying through his back teeth.
Well, it's really interesting, because I remember speaking to you over the years about inviting you to coast at the camps. And of course, I'm retired, and I could never understand this concept of retirement, especially someone like yourself who's been, so active, but we as drummers and musicians, we say, well, how could he stop? He was doing so much. But there is a reason why we turn left or we turn right. From the beginning, let me just take you back a little bit.
Yeah.
When you and I want to place people who are, and I'm thinking in my position, that type of person who picked up drums and was interested in drums, and I went through a period when I was growing up in Ottawa at the time, before coming to Montreal to continue my studies and work here. But at that time, I was seeing every single artist and band that came through. And I remember your first tour with Yes, and you were the warm-up band of the warm-up band. And I don't remember who the other 2 groups were, but they were big. Alice Cooper, I think, or Deep Purple. I don't remember now.
Maybe Jethro Tull, actually. Jethro Tull?
I don't think it was that one. It was a big, the arena concerts where they would have 2 or 3 acts. And they threw a first one in as the warm-up was your first tour. And I remember this specifically because my friend who said, hey, let's go to this concert. It looks like fun. We couldn't get a seat, so we had to stand. And when you guys came on, we both looked at each other and just went, wow. And it was just a whole other way of thinking.
Oh, that's great.
By the time the third act came, I think everyone was so taken by Yes that half the place was emptied. So we got a really good seat afterwards.
Good.
It was funny. Just to say that
it
was interesting, that whole approach, which was coming from groups like Yes, Jethro Tull, of course, ELO, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I can go on and on. This is after the Beatle phase, which got us all going.
Yeah.
But that other phase where the classical meets other forms, it seems to come from England, a whole other level of playing, which kind of twisted our minds, which was beautiful. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, what? Talk about the origins of progressive rock?
Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, it was exciting times. Something that I think people tend to forget is that, yes, the band that I started with was essentially a covers band. And I have a great belief in covers bands. I think they're wonderful things because it's through taking material that people know very well that you can impose your own kind of character and your own attitudes to music, and you can do with a standard piece of music what you like, because people are familiar with the original.
Right.
So yes, started doing covers of songs by bands I'm sure you've probably never heard of or forgotten. Remember Vanilla Fudge? Remember,
of course.
The Fifth Dimension, a vocal group, American vocal group. A little bit of Leonard Bernstein. We had some of that. Why not? All kinds of things. And then eventually we said to ourselves, well, this section's really good. Let's extend this section. Let's put this in a different beat, extend this section, turn it around, and then go back to the original version of it, or some such thing as that. Before you knew it, we were kind of beginning to write our own music, although I'm not sure we thought that was a terrific thing to do or not, but it just seemed obvious that we should fall into doing that. And they were always rather intricate and long-form pieces of music. Everybody loved classical music. And the many ways, the many intros and outros and recapitulations and all the rest of that. We loved all that. And for some peculiar reason, other people liked it too. And I don't mean to be facetious about that. Sometimes what an artist is doing is not necessarily what the public wants for any number of reasons. But in the 60s, it was a wide open kind of world for young drummers like me. And we grabbed it. I didn't know any other world, and we grabbed it with both hands and ran with it. But of course, everything now is almost entirely different. Whatever pertained in 1970 or 1968 when I started doesn't pertain now.
Right. And I remember, thinking back, in our environment, we're discouraged actually to be original. And it was funny because we would all look to others being original, and anytime you tried to do something original, they tried to put you in some pigeonhole, and it was really a challenge.
That's a great shame. Very, very weird. We didn't have the same thing in England.
Right.
The big thing was to be different somehow, but Lord knows how are you supposed to be different after the Beatles? I mean, the Beatles seem to have covered everything. But if they had a sitar, we wanted a sitar. If they had an orchestra, we wanted an orchestra. Right. And then we'd have a sitar with an orchestra. Whatever it was they were doing, we kind of wanted to do it, but take it further, if you like.
Right.
So the Beatles had started us all off. Nothing was going to be the same after Sgt. Pepper. So clearly, anything was game. Anything was fair game. The only unforgivable sin was to sound like some other band, to sound like Nice or sound like King Crimson or sound like anybody else. The trick was to be different if you could.
Yeah. And that became kind of the expectation, I remember, because every time there was a group that came from England, we said, let's see what they're about. Whatever band, there was always something. What was that band that had, like, they're all classical musicians, but they're a rock band? No, the name is not coming to me. But all of a sudden, somebody would pull out a cello, somebody a violin, and I thought that was like the greatest thing.
Yeah. Well, it was all genre busting, as we say.
Yeah. No, it was great. It was great, formative. And then later on, when you played, when you left, what made you decide to leave a company or a group like Yes when they were so successful at that time?
I had hardly played any music in public at all before forming and joining Yes. So, I was a young kid. I started playing at 18, started playing professionally at 18. By 22, I'd seen the same 4 rear ends in front of me for 4 years solid. And I'm sure they were great. I'm sure they were great rear ends. But the thing is, there's other people in the world and other ways of doing it. And I knew that if I didn't progress as a musician, I wouldn't have much to say for myself. I would just go on and on and on, playing close to the edge and roundabout around the world forever. And that's not really my kind of thing.
Yeah,
so I moved to King Crimson, which seemed to me like a totally different group, and in fact was a totally different group.
Yeah,
quite different.
And it's interesting. You just made me think of. I was watching as I was preparing for this today, and I was thinking about in my mind, your kind of history, where we could land, and you made so many decisions. I mean, personal decisions, of course, dealing with music, but it was really, really odd. Last night, I was watching an Orson Welles movie about both sides of the wind, or something like that, and all of a sudden, I'm hearing the 20th Century Schizoid Man is in that movie.
Big King Crimson track.
Right. And I said, wow, I don't believe in coincidences. So it's really strange how these things, I'm watching this movie and all of a sudden I'm hearing King Crimson. And I said, I have to bring that up. It's interesting that in those movies, which was done, this one I think was 1974, they would use music that was a bit of left field. It was, great music, but it was not your typical movie soundtrack or used in a movie as a main theme. Not a main theme, but one of the pieces. So that was interesting.
Yeah, well, pretty much nothing before about mid 1980s was typical. There wasn't a typical, really. I think all of rock music was being invented at the time. Almost everybody was an amateur. The record companies were amateurs in the 60s and 70s. The managers were amateurs. The accountants had no idea how to account. The record companies kept all the money. The musicians had no idea what was going on at all. But tomorrow was going to be better than yesterday. So if you were only paid a little money today, didn't worry too much about it, because tomorrow would be better, was how we thought of it. The record industry was expanding at such a furious rate. Capitol Records alone, on the back of the Beatles, had the income, the gross domestic product of a small Caribbean island. So there was a lot of money about, and you could do pretty much what you wanted, and nobody was frightened of anything. And it was easy to get a recording contract.
Right. Yeah. Especially if they knew they would sell millions at the time. In the process in King Crimson, because that's an interesting band, because it was one of those bands that was very fluid. Many people came in and out, but it was the same band, technically, same concept, the same thinking. When you went into the group, what was the process that the creative process, and what was on the table that had to be taken care of while you were there?
I could point you here to the movie that's just been released at South by Southwest, a movie of King Crimson, which documentary I strongly recommend. It's really a wonderful piece of art, if you like, directed by Toby Amis. And if you want to go and look at that, it'll give you a great insight into the deeply difficult and psychotic existence of that particular band and how that worked. What was its creative process? Well, there was a band leader who insisted he was not the band leader, but had the final say on everything. The only rule on the drums really was that he'd like to hear something that nobody else had ever heard before. That was in tune with me, because that's what I was looking for too. But of course, what people have heard before on drums and what they haven't is a big question.
Yeah,
we were encouraged to be entirely inventive and go further than you thought you could possibly go. You were encouraged to make up a vocabulary of your own that was entirely new, on instruments preferably that you'd not played before and might not even play after King Crimson. So you were encouraged to do things entirely differently. And that was quite hard. For example, perhaps not playing so many metals, perhaps not having any cymbals or hi-hats at all. For example, perhaps espousing electronic drums or the Roland guitar synthesizer. or Chapman stick bass, or Simmons electronic drums, or anything like that.
Sure.
These were all tools that the band wanted to use in order to earn its keep, to try to figure out how music might be tomorrow rather than it actually is today. So we were sort of very futuristically trying to look to the future, certainly.
Right. Now it's interesting because you started with kind of a signature sound. I remember your snare drum sound. I think it's a note that has stuck in
Boom.
yes.
Boom.
Interesting. First of all, before I get to my other question, did you do that on purpose? Like have a specific note?
No, not at all.
It was just wide open.
It's wide open. Yeah, I would have thought it was semi-definite pitch, not a pitch.
Okay. Interesting. Because later, I mean, you really got into the electronic stuff live and really pushed it all the time, which was nice. I mean, when I was doing a lot of work in Montreal, especially in the studios, we were always pushed to have the latest gear, the latest. So it got to be fairly expensive. So we got into a routine of you buy the latest one. It's Simmons 7 comes out. Well, you buy the Simmons 7, use it because all those new sounds has got to be on these records. And then when something new came out, well, you got rid of that and got the new one. And fortunately, you didn't end up with all of those things. So it was a cycle. And I still have my Lindrum, which I never was able to, the original one. And then, went through the DMX and the Roland things and all those sounds. Yeah. But I would, to my students or friends, I would just sell them and buy the latest. So it was that cycle. But I remember when you came, I think it was in Montreal at a venue. It was a great venue, which is no longer.
The Spectrum.
The Spectrum, yes. What a beautiful place to play.
Great, wasn't it?
Yeah. And all of us always look forward to that place because it was like one of those, it was like the Switzerland of music venues.
Yeah.
Right? You could hear a symphony in there. You could hear Mike Manieri. You could hear, I mean, Peter Gabriel, when he was in town putting his big tour together, they put it together here, in the city when Manu Katché was in town. And it was that kind of venue where you could hear absolutely anything. And you were here with, I think it was Earthworks that I heard you with.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And all the electronics, did that Earthworks go through various variations of?
Yes, I mean, Earthworks started as a band designed to incorporate electronic percussion.
Right.
And there were 3 other single line instruments, acoustic bass, tenor saxophone or soprano saxophone, and E-flat tenor horn. And he doubled on keyboards as well. But the idea really was the drummer would play the chords.
Right.
And the other guys would play single line melodies. That was kind of, now we didn't achieve that much at the time, but that's where we were going. So I think the trick to make a band exciting is reach for things. It doesn't matter if you don't get all the way, but at least you know that you're heading towards something. And if you head towards it a little bit further tomorrow than you did today, then that's terrific. So we were headed that way. Events eventually conspired against us. I mean, the cost of the equipment, like you were saying, logistically, it's very difficult. Shipping it around the world was very difficult.
Sure.
It comes up on a baggage claim at Frankfurt Airport, and there's bits of wire hanging out.
Yeah. And
you're thinking, I don't know whether we can do the show tonight. So the early days of electronic percussion were very difficult. But that's what you pay me for. It will be difficult at times. And I think we may have produced no more than a couple of dozen tracks for which electronic percussion was absolutely fundamentally organic to the existence of that track. Without that particular configuration of sounds, that track didn't work. Now, you may say, well, that's a very little output, but I don't care how little it is. It's moving forward. It's stuff, So it was a lot of sweat to do 24, 36 tracks, not very much. But I think it made a mark. It was really something.
Yeah. No, it definitely made a mark, Bill, because I remember sitting in the audience with many friends of mine who are also some of the top guys in the city. And I guess there was at the time this thinking of the drummer being not so much of a frontman, more so than the creative force where it gets beyond the rhythmic to the melodic, and how do you
Yeah,
push that, right? And you
sure,
were the
sure.
in the front running of this.
Well, I mean, people say drums just deal with rhythm, there's no melody. And I always disagreed with that. And I couldn't understand that quite, because to me, it always sounds quite melodic, drums. And I was a big, heavily influenced by Max Roach,
Right.
doing Self-Portrait and For Big Sid and all those drum tunes he had. Sounded great to me, sounded plenty melodic. And it was extraordinary that pulling a couple of these threads that we're talking about together, that at the Spectrum one night at the Montreal Jazz Festival, I look out and there's Max Roach in like row 5. And
I think it was
and
probably that same concert that I think he
it
was
could have
there.
been the same concert. I think Jack DeJohnette was there, maybe, and possibly Bernard Purdy, but I'm not sure. And these guys had come to hear, what's all this nonsense about electronic drums? Is there anything in this? And I think they, I think heads were turned. There was a feeling that this might be a newer development in drums, and that we would eventually get one day to the wonderful place we are at now, where kids grow up with hybrid drum kits that are part acoustic, part electronic,
Right.
and they're effortless with integrating the two too. I was a klutz. I was slow, and the equipment was rough work. But now they're very slick.
Right. Right. No, that's interesting, because Max Roach was probably, I mean, in my book, when I first started listening to Max Roach, he was so melodic, and it was all about melody in the structure.
Yeah.
And he was such a forerunner, not just in that, but encouraging. You just made me think of, I was in New York once listening to, I forget who it was, some club, maybe, I forget which club now, but I'm sitting there for the first set, and I was just about to leave when somebody taps me on the shoulder, and I look up, and this older gentleman says to me, "Would you be kind enough to offer an older man your seat?" I said I was just leaving, and I realized it was Max Roach. Right? So we got into a small conversation, and I thanked him, and I told him my name. Oh, he says, "You're in that group called Repercussion." I said, "Yes."
Yeah.
And I said, and you also were doing all of these other things outside the jazz idiom with your group called Repercussion. What was that?
Boom.
The group.
Max's group is called Boom.
Boom. Yes, but first he called it Boom Repercussion.
Did he? Did
Yes, yes, yes. And I said, "Why did you change the name?" He says, "Well, when I heard about your group, we just dropped the Repercussion."
he? Yeah.
All of a sudden,
to
I
avoid
felt
the lawsuit.
I felt the sudden guilt. I said, "I didn't mean to." That was funny. He says, "But Boom worked." I mean, that was a great. I think they're an 8 or 9 piece percussion group, and they did some really interesting.
Yeah,
things.
they did, and that name lived on. And I did a parody on it with a tune in King Crimson called "Ba-Boom."
Ah, okay.
B''boom, which was so the name lives on. It was a drum duet.
Okay, is that in the in that series that you've released?
Actually, it's not. Tell you the truth, the series it just released is 6 CDs, but that is a limited time. And if you want to know, that's roughly 70 tracks.
Wow.
So 70 tracks sounds like a lot to you and me and my wife, but over a long time, as many recordings as you've made and as I've made, you've got to pick and take something out of that. So something can't go on.
So this project is 6 CDs and there's a book, right? That goes with
this?
The
small hardback book of 52 pages. Yeah, kind of analyzing or explaining for you what's going on in the tracks, why those tracks, and how's it arranged, and all that sort of thing.
Beautiful. And what's it called?
It's called Making a Song and Dance, which is, funny enough, the title of an Earthworks track. I'm not sure that phrase actually translates terribly well. Making a song and dance to an English to me is it's an expression that says making a hell of a fuss, making a hell of a noise, kind of a storm in a teacup. I'm making a song and dance if I get aggravated because you're 3 minutes late on the telephone. I'd make a song. I could make a song and dance about that. And I'm not sure that phrase translates terribly well. But, to me, when I was playing, I'm thinking all the time about dancing and the drums singing, So to me, a lot of my track titles have allusions to or phrases from connected to singing and dancing.
Okay. No, but I think in the theater world or the stage world, I think making a song and dance, I think would have that implication.
Yeah, I think it might do. I'm not sure how much these phrases travel, but it's a very old English phrase, making a hell of a fuss about something.
Right. And it's great that you're explaining some of the things that are going on and contextualizing. I think that's...
Yeah, sure. Why do I like this track? What is it about this track that Bill actually likes? Because we artists don't often get to do that. It's just assumed we like everything, and we don't always like everything.
Right.
And there are little bits, once in a while, there's a little glimmer in your work where something happens that's really great, and you think, I don't know where that came from, but I love being a musician.
Right.
And I think that's nice to be able to point that out to people.
Yeah. No, especially when you've done so much and not just so much, but in varying areas, which is really interesting. It would be like asking Paul McCartney to explain a track on the Sgt. Pepper album, or walk you through. I've heard some John Martin conversations about some of the productions, and it really changes the way you hear that music.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's any harm without doing that at all, and musicians, and we drummers particularly, do all kinds of things for a very good reason. I mean, it may not work, but there's usually some logic or some thinking about what I'm about to play.
Right.
It isn't what I did yesterday, and I'm hoping I may never have done it before, and I'm not going to make any guarantees whether you're going to like it or not. But to me, it's interesting, at least, and that would be a sort of modus operandi for me through my whole career. Really, is what can I do that intrigues me, which then may have the possibility of intriguing you.
Yeah. No, and it's definitely food for inspiration. I mean, it's great that you do that, because we're always thinking and we're always coming up with questions or coming to doors that we say, shall I take that door or that door? And like in your case, I mean, it was interesting for me to see it, because I read about that you got your PhD and decided not to play drums but study and get a PhD, which is not so rare, but I found that interesting. What made you decide to get a degree in something else?
Well, no, not really. It wasn't a big disjuncture. I think I probably stopped playing because, and it's a very simple phrase I've used before, I couldn't really hear what came next in the music. I couldn't quite think. For years, I always knew what to do. I wanted to do this thing. I could do it with these musicians. I'd known what to do. And then around 40-year mark, I was tired, very tired. And again, if you see this King Crimson movie, you'll understand why I was tired. And I wanted to step back out of it, consider what I'd done, why I'd done it, if there was anything creative about it at all, and how might that creativity inform my practice or any other drummer's practice. So I was stepping back out of it and looking at what it is that motivates we drummers. If you like, it's kind of music psychology, really. What are we different from pitched instrument people? Maybe we are, I don't know. Do we have different sensibilities? This is all an interesting area for me, and it helped me figure out what it is I think I was doing over all those years, And really what I was trying to do is make a contribution.
Right. So would you say, if one was to interpret that, is it that I no longer see myself doing anything of interest, or I don't see my place in this? I don't see a moving forward or new explorations that you were really known for before, because you're always exploring and coming out with something new.
Yeah, yeah. I'd done enough with phone calls. I mean, I couldn't make any more. I couldn't. I was tired. I couldn't call up somebody and say, "Hey, let's make a record." I've got this great idea. I know what the drums will play the tunes, and you guys play the rhythm. That kind of thing.
Right, right.
These big steps that Robert Fripp at King Crimson was so good at. These big sort of kind of sketches of a ballpark area in which we might play. It means we're going to not do some things, but we're going to do other things, And I just didn't have the energy at that time or inclination to pick up the phone and start the whole ball rolling for album number 68 or whatever it was. So I wanted to stand back and do other things, and I do like writing. So, since then I've written 2 books and put out 3 box sets. So it's not all been entirely, I haven't got my feet up on the desk doing nothing.
Yes.
Put it like that. It's just I don't perform anymore.
Right. No, that's interesting, because after a while, I mean, it is quite natural, because someone asked me, why would so-and-so stop, or and we also reflect ourselves, why would we want to stop doing certain things? Well, I mean, I think, and you might agree with this, that you lose a certain appetite for certain things, right? That's,
absolutely. You can have too much, I think, of almost anything. I defy anybody who's been doing the same thing roughly for 40 years to not want to do something a little different.
Right.
Hey, I might have always wanted to be a fireman. Now I can be a fireman. I'm not so devoted to drumming that's the only thing in my life. I mean, I love it to death, of course. But I also like to write, because through writing, I make sense of the world for me. Often I need to write it down to try to figure out what it is I'm talking about.
Right, right. And it's, at the same time, it's better to do it earlier than later, because later you may not have the energy to do what you were thinking of doing, right? So
very true. Very true. Yeah, as you get into your mid-70s, you're beginning to think, heck, this is hard work. And I assure you, I've been an academic writer now for 6 or 7 years since I got a doctorate. And that's some tough stuff.
yes.
People, if you're going to walk around and say, hey, I got a PhD, then people are going to say, okay, join the club, but now tell us this, tell us that. And, you need to kind of be in shape intellectually.
Right.
To take that on, I think. Be careful what you say. Be very careful. In fact, doing a doctorate makes people like me extremely pedantic. And it's very hard for me to read the headlines of some tabloid newspaper and really believe that people are saying that stuff with no evidence. It's just rubbish,
Oh.
And you come to see the world slightly differently.
Yeah.
After a doctorate.
And it's an expansion of the mind, actually, really.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is an expansion of the mind, yeah.
And in some ways, once you go down that path, the more you go down that path, you say, I wish everyone had this opportunity, or would take the opportunity.
Yes, I think there's a lot in that. There's a lot in it. And then of course, how can any of this be of any use to the percussion industry or musicians at all? See, I think people talk about rock and they talk about jazz. They used to in the 70s and 80s, and now, of course, all the sub-genres of all those things, math, metal, and progressive rock. I was quite interested in all that, but I was much more interested in drums and drumming. So I don't really care whether what you thought we were doing was jazz or rock or math, metal. I didn't really give a damn.
Right.
What I cared about was, could I do something interesting on a drum set in?
Sure.
So if I had to be playing progressive rock, then I'll play that if that's the place I could go to, or math metal if I had, or hip hop and rap. And a lot of drummers, particularly jazz players, have done great melding and merging with hip hop and rap. I think it's fantastic. But I just at the end of my career, I just couldn't make that leap to a hybrid kit and to hip hop and rap. I couldn't quite get there. I wanted to do something else. I hadn't got enough energy or care for it.
Right.
Yeah,
And yes, and also, I mean, there's the other factor too. At some point, you want to leave room and for others to push, because if
yeah.
you're
Hey,
in front,
absolutely. I believe that totally. You know, every drum stool I'm not sitting on is one that some other guy can be sitting on. And I think that's great. And there's a large part of me which says the old rock bands from England that are now 80 years old, shall I repeat that? 80 years old. You know, I
yes,
mean, I think they could move
yes,
over and things, you know, let other people have a go, I think.
yeah,
But
right.
a lot of people disagree with that.
Right. Well, I mean, there are different different areas of that are interesting. I mean, uh, giving opportunity to, but sometimes
Yeah.
it takes up too much room to allow for something new to come up, because people backing it or supporting it are not sure. So you're not giving that chance for that
Yeah,
change.
sure. Sure.
I mean, these are all, yeah. I mean, I think one has to make the decision like you have, and they're definite decisions. They're not, I think I'm going to, they're definite decisions. And
Yes.
following your path and your trajectory, it certainly was um, a straight arrow here, and then a straight arrow that way, and then a straight arrow that way. There was no question. And that's
Yeah,
interesting.
I didn't go around in circles really. I
Yeah.
kind of went forward, whatever forward means, and I don't really care what it means to anybody else. But to me, I was going forward in my own tiny little head,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to really repeat things too much. And so um, I think perhaps I was excessively against endless repetition. I think there is repetition in all music. All music has a lot of repetition, and I'm not sure now that I've thought about repetition a lot more. There is repetition with a difference, you know, and the nightly delivery of very popular songs for large audiences is not necessarily a crime. I think things can be phrased differently and played differently every night, and just the mere playing of it on a stage every night for new people, I think is in and of itself a wonderful thing. But for me, I didn't want to waste too much time saying the same thing over and over again. But I understand others don't feel like that.
Sure. And there's another thing too. With any person, any artist, any individual, we always want to be consistent. And that's been my thing. You want to be consistent. Now, consistency in what? I mean, in your case, the consistency of change, the consistency of
Yeah,
doing something new. So you're very consistent in everything you've done, even your changes. That's consistent,
yeah, I agree.
right?
I agree. Mm.
Whereas to some, the consistency is doing the very same thing and making it, improving it to no end. But it's really the same thing for the last 80 years. That's
Yeah,
consistent.
yeah,
So,
it's consistent. I agree.
yeah.
I agree. I never really thought about consistency in quite those terms, but I think there's a lot in what you said. Yeah.
And it's interesting to follow someone like yourself who is, I mean, we're obviously having this conversation, and I'm really thankful that you're taking the time, because I think it's important for people to hear what others have been thinking, what made them make certain decisions. There's nothing wrong or right. I mean, just being consistent with yourself,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. And who knows, whether you're shaping your performance or your performance is shaping you. I mean, it's reciprocal. A lot of the stuff, the way you view the world is vitally important. I always say that, the smartest thing I ever did was to get born in 1949, which put me in 1968, which for those who don't know, too young to know, was a pivotal year in all kinds of things in Europe, but particularly in music. And I was 18 or 17 or 19 or something around that time, and just beginning with Yes. So it was a golden time for a young person to start on a drum kit, and you couldn't really go wrong, you know. So I was very lucky in that respect. And sometimes musicians are working in a context which is all but impossible, very, very difficult. When the records started to decline and suddenly there was no money in record companies and people were having music for free. I mean, they more or less have music for free now, but in those days, I would put that where in the early 90s or mid 90s or something. It was very hard to get a gig, to get, and then you might have a pandemic on top of that, makes it hard again. Very difficult, I think.
Right.
For some people, there's some things you can't change. You're playing in a context where the wind is against you,
Right. And things, I mean, there's always hope, because I mean the world needs music, so in whatever form. So that's going to be there. One other question. What is something that, since you've done so many and various things musically and academically, what are some of the things you haven't done that you would have loved to do or may do?
I don't know. I'm offered that a fair bit, and I've done what I wanted to do. I wouldn't do any of it again, particularly. I wasn't sitting around there saying, gee, I'd love to play with the Beatles. I'm not that kind of guy. Or I'd like to play with Aldo. Or, I'd like to play with Weather Report or something. I mean, these are all great musicians, of course, but I'm somehow involved with whatever it was I was doing at the time. And I didn't really look at it in quite that respect, or say, oh, I really wanted to run a string quartet or have a drum kit with a string quartet or something. I have no answer for you there. I'm sorry. That must be a failing in my part, I think.
No. It's a kind of a loaded question in that one can say a person can behave two different ways. One, you're paying attention all the time to everything, and that affects what you do, or you pay attention to very little and do what comes to you. Two different approaches.
Yes. I'm more the latter, I think. I never had a big record collection. I'm not sure I knew. I didn't listen to Yes after I left it. I didn't listen to King Crimson after I left it. I didn't listen to progressive rock when I moved to jazz. I didn't listen to much music at all when I was doing a PhD. What can I tell you? It's just your brain is thinking along a certain path, and everything else is something of a distraction at that time.
Right. So you're a lot more focused.
A lot more focused. Exactly. That's the word I'm after, Aldo. Thank you. I'm a lot more focused. And I think there's a time, however, when you're young, where you just absorb and taste everything, which is rightly so. All young drummers, as you must tell your students, need to play everything with anyone, and don't worry whether it's any good at all or not. Just do it. Yeah. Just get up there and do it if you can. I think that's so important. And if I have one complaint about young people at all, actually, is that they don't seem to have heard much music. And I'm always slightly surprised by how that's possible, given the fact that we're drowning in music and it's all free.
That's right.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I was speaking to, not really teaching, but I was chatting with a kind of 16-year-old guy who was getting quite good on the set, really, And I said, oh, this is terrific. Sort of, tell me, what kind of music do you like? Thinking he might say, well, I kind of prefer jazz to rock, or rock to jazz or something, or hip hop. And he said, I said, what do you like? And he said, he thought for a bit, and he said, Limp Bizkit. Now, I'm sure Limp Bizkit are absolutely terrific, but you need to listen a little wider than one band, if you're going to get anywhere on a drum set, guys. I can tell you that right now. Start listening.
Yeah.
Because there's been so much history on our instrument, particularly, that you need to catch up.
Sure. And that reminds me of, I think I had a discussion with someone. I said, there's part of the reason that you just hit it, where someone will mention one name or two or several genres very tight, is because there is so much. We're inundated that we really don't hear anything, That's my feeling, that there's so much out there. The people, and I mean, also the social media, the whole technology ocean, that, we're difficult in the ocean, but we don't get wet,
It's quite difficult, I think, to stand up in front of a room full of young musicians and make a very strong case that this is absolutely something you should do and will be able to do for the whole of your life. I can't really do that. I'd have to broaden it and say, well, you're going to have to do other things apart from just the one instrument you love. You're going to have to play in many styles apart from just the style you love. And you're very, very unlikely to be somebody like me, who was, fortunate enough to play the music I wanted with the people I wanted when I wanted to, and pretty much where I wanted to.
Right.
Now that's actually quite unusual. They're quite unusual anyway in my era, but it's all but impossible today, I think.
Right. And for the people moving forward, what would you say people who are in love with playing music? I mean, obviously music is there to stay, and it's a universal language, and we know all of that, and it's important, and it's all its faces and phases. What would someone today should be thinking in their own trajectory, in their own track that they're on, that you would mention to them as a mindset?
It's such a big question. I mean, it's a fairly rough world being in music. It's not that easy to be an artist in what they call the attention economy. That is to say, if you make some art or something, you're going to have to scream and shout like crazy to get a pair of ears to listen to it. To pay you any attention at all is going to be quite hard work. So you're going to need all the great classical things that you're bound to need for success in life: stamina, flexibility, the ability to change on a dime, to have a thickish skin. It's not all personal. Don't worry if somebody hates your stuff. It happens all the time. You should see some of the reviews I got. So I don't want to put anybody off, but there are quieter places. You could be a librarian if you're the quiet. Actually, that's a difficult gig now too. But you know what I mean? The central question here is how to keep your body and soul alive and still make a living. How can you do those two things? Because they're in opposition to each other. And these days, somehow you're going to have to build an audience by, as they say, being intimate with strangers, by selling your story, your personality, yourself, through social media, all that stuff that you and I didn't grow up with, Aldo. We just wanted to play the drums, right? That's easy.
That's it, basically.
And
yes.
There was something called a record company that might do something about that, but beyond that, we didn't care.
Yep.
I don't think I knew anything of this at all, really, till I started putting out my own records and realizing you're going to have to work like crazy to get your babies out there.
Right. Oh yeah. No, it was a different time. It's interesting. I mean, although we're up to date with all of these things, but it's a whole different world. And when we're growing up, we just played because it was so much fun, and then one thing led to another, and then we were out there doing it, and then you had to deal with the record companies and all of that stuff, the real world. But now there's a universe that is available to you immediately, and it's a 360 universe. Up and down, sideways. There's, I say to people, you're not walking on a flat surface anymore. You're floating, and it's happening all around in 360. And so you really have to be aware of that, or not, or you decide to just.
Well, I think young people are aware of it, of course.
Yeah.
And what I really like about young people is that, on the whole, who I admire a lot, and I spend quite a lot of time with 24 or 5-year-olds, and I tell you, the guys that the university I was at were extremely sharp. And what I really like about them is they take the world as they find it. Okay, so the problem is that drumming, like so many other things, is increasingly popular. Everybody wants to be a drummer, but it's decreasingly profitable. So anybody who wants to eat, forget it. Because no one's going to pay you to be a drummer much. They're not going to pay you much. But that's how they find things. If you're a 17-year-old, that's where you start when you're 17. And every era has its problems. I'm a great believer in young people fixing things, and they will. I swear they're going to fix climate change too if you don't look out.
Yep,
which is great.
Well, that would be that'll be.
I'm a huge optimist.
Sure, yeah. No, and I think you have to be if you know history and you know the psychology of people, eventually, the right people will say, this can't be done, or it automatically stops, and then you're forced to do something else. And
Yeah.
people are creative in general, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. One of the great pleasures of King Crimson was that it would occasionally stop completely just when you weren't expecting it, and you were turfed out on the street again to find some other way of being a musician. Boy, you kept on your toes in the music industry, that's for sure. Right. And I strongly recommend also to young beginners that you should probably twice a year insert yourself into some musical situation in which you know for sure that you haven't the slightest idea what you're doing in it.
Nice. That's a great
And then
idea.
see what you're made of. Let's see what you're made of when it's like that. I did a little thing with the Buddy Rich Orchestra, and I don't know anything about orchestras. I don't know anything about the big band, not very much, and I was absolutely terrified. But I tell you, about 5 measures in, with the headphones on, and I'm playing, and it's live, and it's the power station in New York, and the sound of the band in my headphones was so great. How could I not play along? It was just great. So you come to find out about yourself when you put yourself in, cold shower of for sure, knowing that you don't know what to do next. It'll happen. If you want to be a creative person, that'll happen. If it doesn't happen, you're not being a creative person.
Yeah, and that's taking chances. That's putting yourself out there. Yeah, that's great advice. And I think we all came across those circumstances, either by will or by circumstance.
Yes.
And it's always a great thing where it tests you and you say, wow.
Yes, you do. And in arts, so what's the worst that can happen? You're not going to kill anybody, you're not going to be physically injured, or it's very unlikely. So the worst that can happen is that people laugh at you. So what? I can laugh at other people. I laugh at myself all the time. So don't get too worried about what other people think of you. I think that's an important tip, actually.
Yeah.
I have worked with other guys who get very upset with what some guy, on the Wisconsin Daily Messenger says, as if that guy matters at all to anything other than to his mother. People get very upset by this stuff, and I can't really understand it myself. It's not bothering me.
And especially if it's a personal opinion, you never know where that actually came from. And
everybody has one of those, as Art Blakey said. Personal opinions are like everybody's rear ends. Everybody has.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that, it's always, this is such a pleasure speaking with you. We can go on for days and
we
could, but we'll see if we can do it again at some point if time allows and your schedule allows. But I really want to thank you for taking the time to share these thoughts with us. I think it's inspiring, and it's really nice to see how other people deal with the same types of problems or issues or situations that come up.
Yeah, I think we both agree a certain strength is required if you want to be a musician, for sure. But if you can do it for a few years and enjoy it, and it is really terrific, I think, watching. And the thing you get out of it the most, I think, really, is standing at the front towards the end of an evening and acknowledging the applause of 30 people or 300 or 3,000 or 30,000 people who show appreciation for what you've done. And I think, in a way, that's the connection there is all there is in it.
Sure.
Everything else, is that you may get paid, you may not get paid. I don't know. All that stuff is on the side. But that sheer human connection of delivering something which is really personal to other people and having them acknowledge it is a great thing.
Yeah.
So be a musician, guys.
Yeah, no, and on top of that too is the fact that, and it's only confirmed when you are in front of a single person or several people who will tell you in a conversation, and I'm sure you've had this a million times because you have been so influential in style and sound and music, that the number of times, several times in my case, when a person comes to you as you're complimenting them on a performance or something, and their immediate feedback to you is, well, when I saw your concert in such and such a year in this place, you changed everything for us, for me, and for them. Therefore, I'm an extension of that in some form. And that is a great feeling that you've actually had something to do with their own path, with their own musical decisions.
Yes.
On some
What you do has had some significance.
Yes.
For other people. Yeah. It has meaning for you and some significance. There's a lovely line which I'll leave you with from Henry Miller, I think, the author. I'm trying to think of the book now, Black Spring, perhaps, where he says roughly that, we all leave our scar on the world.
Wow.
Humans leave their scar on the world. And you want to make it significant. You made a mess, you consumed, you were here on the planet, you left a scar. There's probably scars in the hills behind me. What can you do to make that significant, to make good, as it were, to give back?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a motivating thought in my head.
It's brilliant. And that's, very well explained. And all I can say is to be continued.
Lovely. Great to see you, Aldo.
Thank you so much, Bill. You take care. And
my pleasure.
Till the next time.